Just before the opening of our 2020 virtual festival, I had the opportunity to talk to the members of the Takács Quartet about many aspects of quartet playing. It ended up being an intimate conversation between 5 quartet players. I hope you enjoy it. We are very delighted to have with us on the stage of Chautauqua the wonderful Takács Quartet. And I would like to start off by asking András, who is a founding member of the quartet, which was founded in 1975, am I right?
Absolutely correct.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about how the quartet came together.
Well, we've been classmates at the Franz Liszt Academy, and I grew up with string quartets, so this was our goal all the time, that we would do it professionally and seriously and put in as much work as possible into it, because the repertoire is unmatched, and somehow it always feels like it consists of 4 sympathetic soloists, and we all love that idea.
And was there a tradition, a very strong tradition of quartet playing at the Franz Liszt Academy? I mean, I had a teacher who'd been at the Franz Liszt Academy when I was growing up in London, and he never mentioned the string quartet to me once, because he was very, very much discipline and scales and Sevchik, and my big treat was to play the E major prelude for an hour a day for about 6 months. But of course there is a tradition, a great tradition of quartet playing. But what was it like at that time at the Franz Liszt Academy? Were you all playing quartets a lot?
We played a lot, and what never worked for Hungary, historically being in the center of transit routes, east and west and north and south, it was ideal for string quartet culture, being close and together with Prague and Vienna. So this was just a wonderful fertile ground of history, of old great men's great stories, and of course the literature which was written around us.
And at that time, of course, we were what we would call behind the Iron Curtain. For several years after that. So what was it like for you to be able to travel and even to do competitions? Was it fairly easy to get away?
We always felt lucky, because we were closest to Austria, which was the Western divide, and being historically close to Austria, we had the same attitude, a little bit of not quite as disciplined as our other esteemed neighbors. Just a nice mix of joy for life, little delightful corruption, and somehow it all melted in a wonderful feel.
Interesting, because I was talking to Călin Lupanu, the concertmaster of the festival orchestra, and he was saying growing up in Romania that he practiced 9 hours a day from the age of 10. I'm guessing that you probably cut off at about 8.5.
I was close, but not quite 9. So it was the reason we felt so lucky already back then in our teenage brain, that we saw what discipline and oppression can go under the flag of communism. So we always felt an ideal compromise, borderline this, borderline that, in the meantime enjoying Schubert and Beethoven.
Fantastic. And so your career developed quite fast. I think you won some competitions, and then you had a recording contract, and you were playing all over the world, including in the States in the early years. And then how many years had you been playing at the point where Gabor was his name, right?
Yes.
Gabor Takács. When did he left, in what year?
Oh, we already been in America, in Boulder, at that time. So, Gábor, to quote Zoltán Székely from the old Hungarian quartet, he's only been our leader in the first 18 years.
Is that what Zoltán said?
Székely was talking about Moskovsky when because we only knew of Kuttner. And then when we were trying to scratch the subject, he sort of dismissed, he was, just the first 18 years, said Székely. So.
When you're, how old was he when he said that? Almost 100, probably.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. We've been with Banff. With him.
Exactly. That's where I met him. So 18 years is not much when you're 100.
Yeah. And I have to say, just you know, that of course, as a student, I knew the Takács Quartet, and you know, Gábor Takács had an extraordinary musicianship and vitality in his playing, and I think amazing charisma on stage, and played right on the edge of his seat and took extraordinary risks with his playing, which was, I think, part of the great dynamism that audiences found. And so as a student, I very much admired the whole quartet and my predecessor.
Well, let's talk a little bit, Ed, about that whole process, because you obviously grew up in England. And at what age did you leave England and come to America?
So I came to America in 1990, which, I'm not very good at maths. That made me sort of 21-ish, I think, 21, 22, something like that. And I came to the Juilliard School.
Came to the Juilliard School?
Yeah. I studied with Dorothy DeLay, with whom I think you're also familiar.
I certainly am. And where had you been studying in London?
I studied at the Royal College with a wonderful Ukrainian violinist called Felix Andrievsky. He was a very colourful teacher, very inspiring. And actually, when I first sat down to play with the Takács guys, a lot of their sort of approach to music reminded me of my old teacher.
So you studied at Juilliard for these 3 years with Dorothy DeLay, and presumably you played quite a lot of quartets, both at college and at Juilliard, but never in a kind of professional performing quartet, correct?
Yeah, I mean, if I'd known what was going to happen, I would have played many more quartets when I was in London. I had a nice group at the Royal College, but actually when I was at Juilliard, I played more piano trios. So, but I think chamber music for me had a lot to do with growing up in England, in Cambridge. A lot of fun family chamber music, rather sort of raucous occasions, sort of hacking through stuff, having a great time, sort of breaking down and cracking up laughing and starting again and having good food. So chamber music was always something that was tremendously fun. And
so people in your family played instruments?
Yes. My parents both played violin as amateurs. My grandfather was a good pianist. My grandmother played the oboe. My cousins all played. So we had some pretty good family music. Well, maybe good isn't quite the right word, but we had great fun.
So now you're sort of 24, 25, and how were you approached by the quartet?
I was actually approached by my teacher, Dorothy DeLay, who I think a friend of the quartet and András had been in touch with, and she asked me if I'd be interested in auditioning. So that was a sort of a lucky connection for me, and I came out to Boulder initially just for a couple of days to meet the guys and read music together.
Now, you write about this whole experience very beautifully in your book, which is called Beethoven for a Later Age. And it's a wonderful book, by the way, if anyone hasn't read it and would like to learn a lot about the Beethoven quartets and also about the Takács Quartet and just about music in general and about many other things. I highly recommend it, really beautifully written. But I want to just go back to András for a moment, because I'm curious, why did you not manage to find a Hungarian violinist? And you know why I'm asking you this, but I'm asking it anyway.
Funnily, this idea only came from friends, supporters, and the audience. I mean, we never, we never thought of our future first violin in terms of nationality or these kind of things, because what was most important, that the gut feeling should be the same, the ideas, the reaction to ideas, possibly the school, which was not so much of a must, because we feel, I mean, during the rehearsals you can, or during the audition, you can feel of the other's reaction if he gets it, or there's a trouble just analyzing and understanding the basic wish. So in this way, it was just wonderful. And
yeah. You know that I went through a very similar experience, because for several years after I joined the Tokyo Quartet, everybody other than the three other members of the quartet were wondering why they hadn't chosen a Japanese player. And the truth is that has absolutely nothing to do with the language of music and the feeling of music in the end, which is one of the things that makes music so lovable and so powerful. So Ed, there are a few other areas in which we have some similarities, but I don't want to hog the conversation about just the two of us, because the irony is, so you joined 3 Hungarians, I joined 3 Japanese. I had also gone to the Royal College of Music, also studied with Dorita DeLay at Juilliard, and joined also immediately after I left at the same age as you. I think you were 25, or maybe you were even 24. 24.
Yes.
Yeah. Whatever. But there was one other strange coincidence, which is, what was the instrument that you played on when you first joined?
Yeah, it was a strange coincidence that the group was playing on a loaned set of Amati instruments, and I guess that was the same set that the Tokyo Quartet had played several years before. And in fact, I have to say our founding second violinist Karari was rather generous about that, because actually when I joined the group, he was playing the instrument that you played, the Amati with its decoration.
Louis XIV, yeah.
And after we'd been playing for a while, that was the more powerful of the 2 instruments. And Korchi had a fantastically powerful, gutsy sound. And I was new in the group and still trying to find my way. And he kindly allowed me to play on that violin, which was, looking back on it, extremely generous of him.
Very nice, very nice. But it is just such an odd coincidence, which you and I have been aware of for a little while.
Just a little sweet story to get rid of later on. As you say, Louis XIV, this is what Korchi, our second violin, was insisted at all cost, opposite Charles Baer in London. No, this is the Louis XIV. And Charles Baer, sorry, for me, this is the Prince Eugene or whatever. No, this is the Louis XIV. So Korchi got an argument with the foremost expert of the world. So it was extremely fun.
Good for him. Was probably, I don't know where it came from, but we were always told it was the Louis XIV. It was beautiful, inlaid, and
it sounded extremely noble, fancy, and otherworldly. But no.
So now, Harumi, you have also grown up in a tradition of string quartets, as we all know, but I don't know if everybody's aware of that. So tell us a little bit about the environment in which you grew up in New York City.
Sure. Both my parents are string players. My father's a violist. He was the violist of the Juilliard String Quartet. And my mother is a violinist, and she was in the Gallimere String Quartet for over 2 decades. So yeah, it was part of the family. I heard music all around me, and in particular, string quartets.
And I don't know if I told you this, but when I went to Juilliard in 1975, I formed a string quartet, and my teacher was your daddy by my first year.
I hope he was nice to you.
He was, wonderful. I mean, so kind, so thoughtful, so intelligent in his approach, and it was really inspiring. And I actually once, for some reason he couldn't teach at Juilliard, so we came you weren't even born, but we came to what I assume was the apartment that you still lived in after you were born, and we had a lesson in the apartment. So, no, your father's a great musician and a very, very respected. How many years did he play in the Juilliard Quartet?
I hope I get this right. I think it was 47. I believe.
Yeah, yeah. So András, you're getting close. So Harumi, growing up with two parents who play the violin and viola, was it something you wanted to do, or did it just seem to you like that's what everybody did? How did you start playing the violin?
Well, my parents felt strongly about having some music in the house for both me and my sister, and so they started both of us on piano. And my sister was a beautiful pianist and played very elegantly and very beautifully on the piano. I had a slightly different experience. I found the piano very scary because I was 5 years old and the piano seemed huge to me. And so I was intimidated just looking at it. And I was also scared of falling off the bench, and it was a complete disaster. And so I begged my parents if I could try the violin, because I felt like it would be more comfortable, and I loved singing as a kid. I was always singing very loudly in the house, and I thought the violin would be a little bit more in my range. And my mother said, absolutely not. Forget it. Pick anything else, just not the violin. Please, not the violin. And, my father sort of went along with that, but I kept asking and asking, probably because they said no, is probably why I wanted it so badly. And then I remember very clearly one day, I was about 7 years old, and I remember at the dinner table asking again, please, can I try the violin? And I remember my father saying in a very quiet whisper to my mother, Hiroko, why don't we just let her play a little bit, And my mother said, okay, all right. And so I started playing, and I didn't study with my mother. I studied with a close friend of the family, and my mother and I had a wonderful newborn friendship through the violin, which was very beautiful.
Good thing you didn't study with her, because it might not have been the same story.
My mother is very wise.
Fantastic. And how old were you when you started playing then? Was it 6 or 7 or something like that?
I was 7 when I started the violin.
So you've obviously played chamber music all your life, pretty much. And so tell us then how this all happened, that you became a member of the Takács Quartet.
Well, I joined the faculty at the University of Colorado at the College of Music here in Boulder about 6 years ago. And I was a full-time violin professor, and my office was directly across the hall from the Takács studio. And I had collaborated with both Jerry and András in several faculty concerts on different recital series. And there was one summer in particular when Karchi was out for a few months, and I played a few concerts during the summer with the Takács Quartet, and that was thrilling and really exciting for me during that time. And then when Karchi retired, I was asked if I would like to join, and it was an absolute no-brainer. I said yes immediately. In fact, I remember when I was asked if perhaps you'd like to think it over or something, and I just said yes. So I was just very excited, and just moved offices literally across the hall, which was really wonderful.
Fantastic. I mean, we'll get a little bit to the meaning to the quartet of CU Boulder and that whole relationship. But I want to go over to Richard. We mentioned a little bit about your playing with James Ennis and in his wonderful string quartet with Amy and Eddie. And how many years did you play with them?
Well, it's a little funny because I know all of Jimmy and Amy and Ed through this festival in Seattle called the Seattle Chamber Music Society. They have a summer festival and a winter festival, and I'm from Washington State, and the former director was a woman named Toby Sachs, this cellist who I love, and she was a dear friend, and she unfortunately passed away. But Toby basically invited me into her life, into her house, to be basically the violist at the festival, her festival, for many years, where I'd be there the entire summer playing with everyone that came through. And of course, before I knew James was to become her successor, I played with James, and I think I played a Janacek quartet with James and Joe Lynn and Robert Demain. And it was one of those festival experiences where you have a weekend to put together Janacek 1, but it was sort of like one of these amazing things that sort of, the synergy and everything came together very quickly. And in 2010, Amy actually was the person that came up with the idea, why don't we have a concert of Bartók 4 and Opus 74 Beethoven, and it was just a really wonderful time. And so the four of us started this amazing project together. You know, James he's so incredibly in demand. I mean, oftentimes when we'd meet, he'd be playing with the Chicago Symphony. He's like, why don't we all fly to Chicago and rehearse all day in the morning, and then James will go downstairs and play, Tchaikovsky Concerto, Barber. Let's do that like 3 days in a row. So it was a really incredible time, and each one of those people, Toby died actually one summer when we were all together. And we were in the house when she basically told us that she had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And it was really, it was so hard. It was especially hard for me. And I'm sure it was hard for everybody else. But we just have shared a lot of life together. I've seen all of their children be born, and it's been a very meaningful time.
So were you the original violist of the Ennis Quartet, or did you have a predecessor?
No, I believe I am the original. Maybe there were some other things when James and Amy were together at Meadowmount when they were 14.
Oh, that doesn't count.
No. So yes, I've been the violist of the quartet.
Right. Let's go back a little bit further, because people are always intrigued by wonderful violists like you. At what point did you start playing the viola? Was that your very first instrument, or did you study the violin for a while?
I started on the violin. I'm from a small little town on the Olympic Peninsula called Sequim, Washington, which is, when I was growing up, was a population 3,000, and there was 15 churches, all Protestant, one Catholic church. And it was a very small little community, and my grandparents and my mother, I was raised by those three people, and I think my grandparents were very shrewd. They wanted to make sure that I could have a future, and we didn't have we didn't have means. So they tried all of these things to get me ready for college when I was a very young, like 3, 4, 5 years old. And violin lessons, Suzuki violin lessons was one of them. And I think I really took to that. And about 8 years later, there was a man named Alan Aglitzin, this violist who had a quartet called the Philadelphia String Quartet. They were all members of the Philadelphia Orchestra under Ormandy. And Vita Reynolds, Erwin Eisenberg, and Charles Burnand. And at the time, I think this is probably in the 60s, they quit this secure position and just moved out to Seattle, Washington, which at the time was sort of a pioneer town, is what they say, and started this residency at the University of Washington. And then Alan purchased a huge dairy farm very close to my house where I grew up, and started this very, very nice chamber music festival and institute. And so I was one of his kids at a young age. And so I met Alan when I was about 12, and he was the man that basically introduced me to chamber music. And actually I play on his viola to this day. I've been playing on it for about 3 years. And I think that's where I really, those summers as a child, studying with Alan and discovering what András, Ed, and Harumi have been talking about, the profundity and just the best music ever written at that age and with those people, it profoundly influenced me.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, it's fantastic that you're with the quartet. The quartet sounds wonderful already. And I wanted to talk a little bit with all of you, and you can just chime in as you like, because obviously the reason that we do this, that there have been so many quartets in the history of music, is the repertoire. You know, we would not make this kind of commitment and live with this kind of interdependence if it wasn't so worthwhile. And in fact, the music probably feeds into our relationships and our friendships as well. But it is a very interesting sort of experience to be in a string quartet for many, many years and to be so connected. It is kind of like a family. And there are very, very few situations that are like this when we think about it. I mean, if a sports team, somebody gets injured, they bring in somebody else. You know, you have substitutes all the time. And in businesses, you know, there's always a new CEO, new managers, new all kinds of people coming in. It doesn't really affect the momentum of that particular kind of group. Teachers even can have substitutes. And orchestras, you know, I'll walk on stage and somebody else is playing second oboe. I didn't know, you know, they barely even asked me. But that simply doesn't happen. I mean, you would never go to a performance of the Takács Quartet and say, well, actually tonight, Harumi's not going to be there, somebody else is going to be playing. We just don't do that. Unless it's a specific situation, Harumi, like you mentioned a couple of years ago, when there was a period of time where you needed to be a replacement for very, very specific reason. But it's really unusual. So let's talk a little bit about this whole extraordinary thing of being a family. Now, Richard is your newest adopted member, and he has a lot of experience at playing quartets. But I only want to talk about the lovely part of it, because I played only for 14 years, which seems like nothing to at least two of you. But those three people there's nothing quite like that relationship. I mean, they are kind of my other brothers. I have two brothers already, but I have three Japanese brothers whom I adore, even if we didn't get along all the time. But it is a very, very special and wonderful relationship. So anybody want to take this on?
That's a huge topic, and I think you're right it's about the repertoire, and it's about the repertoire and the shared experiences that they create. And so this afternoon we also recorded the Hymn of Thanksgiving from Beethoven's String Quartet, Opus 132. It's a heavenly piece that he wrote as gratitude upon recovering from a life-threatening illness. Although it wasn't really quite as straightforward as that, because he felt ill again quite soon afterwards, and therefore the statement of gratitude is also one of faith. And to me, it was rather wonderful. Just the music goes rather slowly, and so you're concentrating on the playing, but you also have a little more time to actually just listen to the overall effect. And for me, it was a very moving experience, just being part of that sound, of that piece of music that was written 250 years ago, and also to recognize that he was making a statement of faith about his health. But when you play in a string quartet, you also make a statement of faith in each other. It's an irrational thing. you don't rationally sit around and really weigh the pros and cons of joining a string quartet. At least I didn't, and I think it's the same for the others. It's much more of a gut feeling, and I think it is the music primarily that binds us together, and I think that's quite moving when you think about Beethoven and how he himself found relationships, his friendships, his family relationships very, very difficult. And he was volatile and very idealistic, and people never lived up to his standards, really. But he created this music which allows these amazing bonds between players and our audiences. So certainly this afternoon I felt very grateful just to be on the stage playing with these guys.
Wonderful. I mean, and one of the interesting aspects of it too, I think, that, we don't have an outside coach. There's, in many other situations, there's somebody who is kind of the boss. In fact, we are each other's coaches in a way. We have to be very generous in how we speak to each other, and we have to also be very patient in how we receive suggestions and thoughts, because we may well disagree with them, and then there has to be a civil dispute that goes on, obviously. I mean, that's a healthy discussion. And then, of course, when we walk on stage, we are absolutely a team. We have to be a team. That's a really quite interesting dynamic as well. Harumi, how's that been for you with like a full-time quartet over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I think that's interesting what you were saying about it feeling like a team, and what you were saying about feeling generous with one another. I think what I feel is that generosity comes from a feeling that it's not just a string quartet, but it's almost like an ecosystem. In other words, it's not so much that I'm being generous because I'm a nice person. It's more like, in order for this to work, we need oxygen, we need soil, we need food, we need a series of interwoven relationships, and that includes the composer, that includes the audience, the donors, the friendships. And with all of that comes a beautiful sense of responsibility. And in many parts of my life, I feel like responsibility can be a burden. But in this particular case, it's the most beautiful feeling I've ever felt in my whole life, to have this amazing responsibility to not just these other three people, but our whole quartet ecosystem. So I feel like it's a very beautiful part of my life.
That's beautifully put. And there is this sense that one is also maintaining at every moment and building on a history, which is very significant at this point. I mean, your quartet is a world treasure in a way to so many people who love listening to you and love the music that we all share. András, I'm kind of fascinated. You've been in that chair for a long time. How many colleagues have you had now? It's probably 6, I guess, right?
I never counted, and that was also a fascinating subject whenever we did or had to change personnel, because most people were shocked that we had to do it. And then my answer usually was, yes, absolutely, we had to do it. It was necessary. But also it's wonderful that a new set of thoughts and way of thinking and inquisitive mind and just a totally different personality came in, which Harumi referred to very poetically as ecosystem. I had much more pedestrian description, but somehow it changes every little detail of every single one of us, because whatever the way I talk to Gábor Takács it's certainly not necessarily to talk that way to Ed, and vice versa. So you mentioned finding a CEO or a CFO to a company, and I usually thought about those checklists consisting mainly 15 points, some way of people skills, extreme smartness, but the rest is really just dealing with numbers. And we have the luxury of digging and dwelling and enjoying these these masterpieces of geniuses who were not only geniuses but took extra care and tenfold the trouble, like to write a symphony. And how spoiled can we be than dealing with these pieces and having endless discussions year after year, and not only season by season, but when we revisit these pieces after 10 years or 15 years. And what I find so fascinating, that our checklist for a new member or for our own being is maybe tenfold, because and that's how. And since we are aware of this, we treasure the existing members exactly that, because it's so rare to find the right dynamic, the right person, the right human reaction.
I think if I can just chip in, it's also, at least for me, it's personally quite taxing to be in a string quartet. I feel like I have to basically be a nicer person than I basically am. What you mentioned, Peter, right? How you have to be able to take criticism well. You have to find ways to talk, and it's difficult because sometimes you're overtired, and sometimes you don't have enough time to work on a piece of music. So you need to have a lot of trust in each other, and I think we all over time see I should just talk for myself. The others, especially András, poor András, has definitely seen a whole range of me over 27 years. And there's a sort of a trust that comes from seeing the weaker side of someone as well as the stronger side. And hopefully if you get through that, it all melds into your music making. And I think, I felt with the playing today as well, it's one of the things that's very liberating is to feel that you're part of something. You can be part of something with three other people that's just bigger than yourself. You put a lot of yourself into it, and you still, in the right circumstances, feel like an individual. But in the end, you also get to let go of those type of preoccupations, and that's immensely liberating.
Yeah. It sort of takes a tremendous amount of confidence, in a way, to put yourself in that position. But a string quartet is not a good place for a narcissist.
This is true.
To me, it seems like the chemistry between the four of you, which is only a few days old, actually, and it's one of the most fascinating things about a string quartet, which people don't think of how many different relationships there are. Because there's the relationship of the four, there's 3 relationships of trios, I think there's 6 relationship of duos. So that's a lot of different relationships, and the chemistry is unique to each of those groups and very special. And I think back, and I can still feel exactly what that chemistry was with my 3 colleagues. I never experienced a member change myself, but then in the end, the only thing that matters to me is when I listen to a recording of something, I say, we were committed. Yeah. We were trying to help each other make the most beautiful music. And the most spiritual experience as well for people who would come to listen to us. Because after all, there are not that many opportunities in the world for people to come in and really get into their own world of contemplation, let their imagination go where it will go while they're listening to this extraordinary music that we play, whether it was written yesterday or one of the early Haydn quartets. We're just so privileged to have this incredible repertoire. I want to ask you just about one thing, because we're in Boulder. It's a very special place. I've only known Boulder really for 2 or 3 years myself. I absolutely love the city, and I love the atmosphere there. And I have only met the most extraordinarily wonderful people there. Do you think that living in Boulder has been somewhat of an advantage to the quartet over the years? Because it feels to me that if I could choose where to live, if I was going to play in a string quartet again, it might well be Boulder.
I'll let the others speak, but I think it's been completely crucial for us, and particularly just the sense of community and building friendships here over the years. The life of a traveling quartet under normal circumstances is pretty crazy, running around all over the place, and it can be quite disorienting, and it's been both grounding and rejuvenating to be in such a supportive, beautiful community.
We arrived here 35 years ago, and our core audience up until this day mainly consists of people who we befriended already that time. When we look at the number of people living here, which is roughly 100,000, and compare it to New York City, the audience who are coming to our concerts would be the equivalent of filling a stadium of 120,000 people in New York City for chamber music. I mean, that would be unheard of. And so it's all the more reason to feel spoiled and thankful and grateful, and I'm just extremely happy here.
Wonderful. Richard, I know you're brand new to the city. I know your three colleagues welcome you with open arms. The same goes for myself and everyone at the Colorado Music Festival, and I'm sure everyone that you're going to meet. And I really hope you will love being in Boulder, and just 50 minutes from Denver Airport. That's what people don't realize. It's so easy to get to. So welcome. And I want to thank all four of you for everything you've done to spend this time with us, to have played on our opening concert in this very special year. It's been really inspiring. I'm so deeply grateful to you. And I want to just mention again, Ed mentioned it earlier, that you've done a performance, given us a performance of the Heilige Dankgesang, perhaps the greatest movement that Beethoven ever wrote. I can tell you that my mother, who knew nothing about classical music, once came to Israel when we played an entire Beethoven cycle. And when I asked her at the end of it what was her favorite movement, she said, hands down, the Heilige Dankgesang. It is very wonderful that you have played that for us, and it is available to be heard online. And I strongly recommend that you give it the 18 or 20 minutes or whatever it takes to witness that piece, because there's really nothing quite like it. So I wish you all the best. I send you virtual hugs. Thank you for everything. And I look forward very much to seeing you and hearing you in person soon.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
you.